From the Donald Danforth Plant Science Center, HEC-TV, Boeing, and the Danforth Center are proud to present Conversations, Part 2 of a discussion on global water availability.
I'd like to welcome everyone to the Donald Danforth Plant Science Center this evening. So good evening. I'm Molly Klein, and I am a plant scientist by academic training, and I am an agriculture and plant science advocate. I'm retired from Monsanto. And I have the great privilege of being the chair of the Conversations Committee and also filling in for the chair of the Friends Committee, Jay Noose. We're very pleased to have several experts with us to talk about the subject of water tonight. I would like to acknowledge and thank the Friends Committee and also the Conversations Committee for being the host of Conversations for 10 years now. We have been having conversations for 10 years. Unbelievable. We were talking earlier today. We have way more than 10 years more of conversations to have. We're also very grateful to the Boeing Company for their support as a sponsor for the past 7 years of the conversations. Our program tonight is being recorded, and it will be aired on multiple Saturday and Sunday evenings at 5 p.m. beginning June 2nd, and that's on HEC Higher Education Cable TV channel. And past programs of the conversations can be found on the Danforth website, so check that out also. This year, we decided we wanted to do a series on waters, and back in March, we had two experts, Dr. Roberto Lenton from the Food for Water Institute at University of Nebraska-Lincoln, and he was joined by Michael Doan, who leads sustainability at Monsanto, and Jim Davis being the moderator. And what we learned, they gave an overview that water for plant crop production, for our food, and the great challenges that we are having and going to have more of. What we also learned, there was no single solution to this great problem and demand that we'll continue to have for water, that we must work together. Plant science research is key to that. And that is going to lead us directly into this evening's topic, and we're going to talk about regional efforts to address global water availability and impact on agriculture. Hopefully you all picked this up. If you didn't, these are available for you to submit questions to our panelists, and also has the bios of our speakers. But it is my great pleasure to introduce our moderator, Professor Jim Davis of WashU, and also our distinguished panelists, Dr. Tom Brutnell of the Donald Danforth Plant Science Center, and he's director of the Enterprise Institute for Renewable Fuels. And joining him also is Dr. Bob Sharp, who is professor of plant sciences, and he's director of the Interdisciplinary Plant Group at the University of Missouri-Columbia. And thank you for coming, and Tom, you being here, and Jim, and also for that great display. If you didn't look at it, please take a few minutes on the way out. And with that, I'm turning this over to Professor Davis and our panelists.
Thank you, Molly. Well, I want to join Molly Klein in welcoming this wonderful audience to this second of our conversations about water. Water might not seem to be a very exciting topic, a glass of water, bath water, shower, but in fact, I think water is becoming increasingly important. The supply of and the demand for fresh water is a crucially important topic today. Some of you may have seen a piece in the New York Times, I believe on Monday, talking about an aquifer in central Kansas that just went dry. Lots of sand in the water, and then no water. And that may happen increasingly in the future. But if the supply of and the demand for water is a crucially important topic, it's hard to imagine a place where it's a more important topic than the Plant Science Center. Where would plants be if it were not for water? As I thought about that, I came up with a few questions, general, but the questions that may serve as prompts to start the conversation tonight. One question I thought of was, can we grow plants, design plants, to use scarce water more efficiently? I'm a teacher. I almost wrote, can we train plants to use water more efficiently? But I figured that might be a stretch. But maybe we can design them to use water more efficiently. Can plants use less water and still provide an abundant harvest? That's crucially important when you recognize what's going to happen to the population. Numbers I've seen suggest that by 2050 at least, we'll go from the present 7 billion to 9 billion people who have to be fed. I hope not in this country, but it's certainly in lots of countries, food security will be an issue, and that has to do with water. Finally, can we have our food and fuel and conserve water too? Food and fuel and conserve water too. Bob Sharp focuses on root systems and plants, and Tom Brutnell focuses on the top part of plants, but on bioenergy. So can we have everything? Can we have water, fuel, food? And if we can't have everything, what might give first? Can we design the plants? I love it. Can we train the plants?
We certainly can design the plants. And the plants actually do a pretty good job of training themselves. And Bob, we were talking earlier about an experiment that's ongoing in China where water is a serious problem. And it's really limiting a lot of their crop productivity right now. And there's, I don't know if you want to get into that experiment.
Yeah, we can jump straight to that if you like. It's a really very interesting example, and perhaps the most dramatic example I can give you of how fundamental understanding of plant response to drought, the type of work that I do and the type of work that's done here at the Danforth Center, has led to a huge improvement in the efficiency of plant water use in agriculture. It's partly why we have the display out there for you. Roots that in a drought situation is that normally the top part of the soil that dries first, obviously, after it stops raining. And the roots that are in that surface soil can sense that environment, and it was discovered 20, 30 years ago that they can send signals up and signal the leaves to start responding to drought. And Tom can talk about this a bit more in a minute, but there are pores in the leaves that can regulate water use from the leaves. And based on that knowledge, there's a method called partial root zone irrigation has been developed and is applied in China particularly, where taking advantage of that knowledge, plants are only watered, irrigated on one side of the root system at a time. So you're only using half the amount of water, but you're also allowing those roots that are in that drying soil to start sending these signals and regulate the water use by the plant. And this has led to about a 30 to 50% reduction in use of irrigation water in semi-arid areas of northwest China. And it's actually leading to recovery of landscape level. There was a huge inland lake that in 40 years turned from a lake to a desert. And as a result of this modification based on knowledge of plant physiology, it's led to a threefold increase in the flow of water down the rivers and the beginning of recovery of this ecosystem.
Yeah, and I think that's just an excellent example of training.
I want to ask about the yield. Do they get as much rice
This is wheat and corn. That it's, actually, by knowing what they're doing, they've achieved the saving water without sacrificing yield. Now, if you didn't know what you were doing, the plant would get too stressed under drought, and the pores in the leaves close too much, reduce photosynthesis, and then you'd reduce yield. But by just knowing, it's like an early warning system that you're turning on in the plant, and it's allowing it to start regulating water use. And they've achieved this reduction in irrigation and water use without affecting yield, maintaining yield. It's amazing.
One more follow-up, and then I'll turn to you, Tom. Any examples of comparable practice and outcome in the United States?
Yeah, that's an important question. In fact, I was exploring that a little bit today before coming down. I know it's being at least tested, if not utilized, in citrus production in California, and it's certainly used in viticulture, in grape production, for wine production in this country and in Australia. So for high-value crops, it is being applied in this country. But for row crop agriculture in the U.S., I don't think it's being even tested, let alone utilized.
So we just irrigate as usual?
Say again?
We just irrigate as usual?
Yes, too much so, yes.
Tom, you were going to say something?
Yeah, no, and I think, when we're looking at these strategies, and this is a way of sort of training those plants, depriving them of water and having them signal for the effect of less water in the root systems. I just wanted to step back, and we often think of plants as sort of these inanimate objects that are just growing, and they just grow. But they're fairly sophisticated organisms, so they have as many genes as we have. And in some ways, they're a lot more complicated than humans. If we get too hot, we get thirsty. I'm thirsty. I can reach over. I can grab the water and take a sip of water and meet that need. So I've developed a nervous system to help me do this. Plants use biochemistry and their physiology to help them deal with the absence of water. And they produce metabolites, they produce hormones that carefully regulate their ability to not only take up water, but utilize water. And so I think it's important to have that concept in mind as we're starting to engineer these plants to utilize water more efficiently. It's not a very simple system, and plants have evolved for billions of years having to deal with their environment. And so they've evolved a very sophisticated set of signals and networks to deal with this. And so we can actually use evolution to guide us in ways to understand how plants utilize water. And basically we've got two bits, right? We've got the roots that are bringing water in from the soil, and then we've got the shoots where water is leaving the leaves through these pores.
And that's the part you work on, I think.
Right, and that's the photosynthesis. So that's
you work on the top part of the plant, and Bob works on the bottom part.
He's underground, so.
Yeah.
Of
An
course,
underground plant scientist. I love the notion.
yes, and because of that, Bob can't live underground. It makes, I don't know, maybe, but it makes it much more challenging to study roots. We just don't see them. And breeding programs are really evolved around looking at the above ground parts of plants. So, it's a big challenge from the plant science perspective. But going back to this, what we can learn from plants. So there are sort of three different flavors of photosynthesis. So most plants use a form called C3, which is not so water use efficient, and there's lots of transpiration, so lots of water lost through the pores. Plants like corn and sorghum use a modified form of photosynthesis known as C4, and that's a little more water use efficient. And then desert plants, cacti, use another form of photosynthesis called CAM. And each of these different photosynthetic systems have a unique biochemistry, unique anatomy associated with those flavors. And so by understanding that process, so by studying these plants, we start to learn how plants are moving water through the plant and doing it more efficiently. And potentially engineering those traits from some of these high water use efficient plants into the less water use efficient plants.
But a couple of minutes ago, you talked about plants evolving over what, billions of years?
Yes.
Certainly millions of years. But now we're facing climate change, water shortages. How much time do we have? We're talking about plants are where they are now because of the past billion years.
Mm-hmm.
I'm assuming we don't have a billion years
No.
to design more efficient plants.
No, like you said it, it's 2050 where we've got to increase our productivity by 70%. So we're in the middle of it now. We really need to ramp up the productivity of the plants. And so the approach we're taking here at the Danforth Center is to develop new technologies. The phenomics facility that's being built out by our greenhouses is a one-of-a-kind, state-of-the-art facility that's going to allow us to have a very high-resolution, very fine-grained analytical tool to study the response of plants to drought. And if we can survey drought response from the effect it has on photosynthesis to the effect it has on just plant growth and development, then we can start to understand the genes and the networks involved in regulating that response and ultimately engineering that response into plants.
Yeah.
If I can follow up
Sure.
on that. So obviously that's critically important. And the facility you're putting in here is fantastic to pursue that. But returning to a focus on roots, as was pointed out, I mean, roots obviously are underground. As we've tried to show you in the display outside, roots are very complex. And those are still relatively young corn plants, but a mature corn plant would have roots that penetrate 6 feet down into the soil. And that depth of rooting is one of the critical factors for plant response to drought. I can use an example from dryland wheat production in Australia. One of my colleagues showed that if you just gain an additional 10 centimeters worth of rooting depth at the end of the season, that can lead to a 10 to 20% increase in wheat yield. The reason is because in most crops, wheat and corn included, it's the reproductive development at the end of the season, which is the economic yield. And you can have plenty of water throughout the season, but if you run out of water just at the end of the season, then you'd have a massive effect on yield, loss in yield. And so by being able to grow roots deep and get them down and make use of water that's deep in the soil at the end of the season, that's a critical component. But to use the phenotyping approach for that is obviously really challenging because what we call high throughput phenotyping, which the facility that you're putting in here can do, it's relatively easy for leaf characteristics. But if you want to screen thousands of plants, thousands of lines for the ability to grow roots 6 feet in the soil at the end of their development, that's another story altogether.
Are we devoting enough attention to plant design, to plant research? I'm thinking about food security
No.
and energy security. And you have the answer before I finish the question. Where do we stand, say, in comparison to health research?
So in this country, we spend about 1/10 on plant science research relative to medical research. In China, it's about 50-50. And in a place like China, food insecurity touches home much sooner than it does here, right? And so the investment in China has been amazing, really. I mean, if you consider China 30 years ago, right? In Shanghai, many homes didn't have indoor plumbing, right? And when I was in Shanghai a few weeks ago, and indoor plumbing is not a consideration. It's how many widescreen TVs you have in your house, and so the transition there has been amazing. But with that growth in economic development is also there's been a growth in demand, and people are moving off of vegetarian diets. They're eating meat-based diets, and if you're eating a lot of meat, those pigs and those chickens and those cows are being fed corn. And so the demand for corn in China has been tremendous,
Which uses a lot of water to grow.
which uses a lot
Yeah,
of
so I
water.
even have some facts and figures for you. So 1 pound, to produce 1 pound of beef, following on from that example, uses 1,850 gallons of water. So, and a glass of wine that you just had out there was 58 gallons of water it takes to produce. So water consumption is huge.
So one of the big things we could do for water conservation is alter our diet. I'm not saying people would leap on that bandwagon,
That's
but
true.
the Western
That's
diet uses a lot of water.
That's true, but the trend is the exact opposite, like in China, as you said, and beginning to be so in Africa as well, and which is a great thing that people's lifestyle is improving, but it has huge consequences for this topic.
And what it does is production's limiting. So this gets back to your original question, are we investing enough? So China sees this as a real food security issue. They need to invest more in making plants that are drought tolerant, that produce more on less land. And China now is #2 global producer of corn, and it's their #1 crop. So corn has now replaced rice as the #1 crop grown in China.
They still import a fair bit of food.
They still import, yeah. Well, the corn last year, they didn't import any, so they grew what they needed at home. But what that means is the margins are very tight. So you have drought like we had in the Midwest last summer, and it immediately affects the price of corn, the commodity prices.
Sure.
And so China's doing a lot of development in Africa now, is building roads, bridges, and improving agricultural systems in Africa for export to China. So, the funding rates in China are triple what they are here. The investment in the infrastructure is much more extensive in China than it is here. So, I think to remain competitive, we certainly need to invest more in plant science research.
I want to turn from my questions, which could keep going, to some of the questions that have come in from the audience. Here's one for you, Tom. It's a very general question, but it's a crucial one. Does the Danforth Center work with other interested parties on this issue?
Yes, we do. So a number of us at the Danforth have active collaborations with groups outside of the center. So my group is currently collaborating with a group at the University of Illinois, where we have some of these rainout shelters similar to what Bob's developed. And maybe you can speak to the rainout shelters. But it's a way of imposing a drought. So when there's a rain event, there's a canopy that will come over the field and prevent water from getting on those field sites. And so this was a field site that was developed with Steve Long and his group at the University of Illinois. And they've got all the sensors up there to monitor the weather, to do soil moisture readings. That's a pretty sophisticated setup. And so we actually utilize some of the enterprise rent-a-car funding that we have here at the Institute to put these state-of-the-art canopies up. So we developed that, we tested it out, we got some preliminary data, and that was basically the leverage we needed to secure a big Department of Energy grant. So I think this is one of the things that I really appreciate at the Danforth Center is the commitment by the community here, investing in plant science research, because what starts off as a relatively small investment can quickly ratchet up into much more funding and much bigger, broader collaborative science.
Makes me think of the phrase seed money.
Yes, indeed. Bad.
If I could just elaborate on the rainout shelters, as you saw in the video out here, that we've also installed some in Columbia at the University of Missouri. The reason they're so critical here is drought is an exceedingly complex thing to study. The duration, the intensity, the timing relative to the stage of plant development, and the plant response to drought and the things that we can study, that we want to study under drought, vary depending upon those different aspects, when the drought is imposed and how severe it is. And we can't really just rely on Mother Nature. I mean, last year you might think was a really good year to study drought. Actually, it was much too severe, and we had to irrigate the plants to stop them from dying. So we didn't need to use the rainout shelters last year. but like today, often it rains too much in Missouri as well. So drought is typically an important factor in crop production somewhere, if not in all of Missouri, at some point in the growing season, but it's very unpredictable. And so to be able to do this type of work in the field, it's really important to have those facilities that allow us to control when and where and how much drought occurs.
Here's one that is particularly a professor. This question is relevant. How can universities train students to be prepared to tackle these issues? How do we get young people excited about plant research, plant science, and bioenergy research?
Well, I have two of my students here who I think are living proof of being excited about plant science. The topic we're talking about is an ideal topic for graduate student training because, as Tom and I have sort of touched on here, drought is very complex, it's very interdisciplinary, and certainly once you move out to the field, from the lab, from the greenhouse out to the field, it becomes many-fold more complex. There's interactions with temperature, with insects, with pathogens, with diseases and soil type, with nutrition. So it's a really very complex topic that requires a team approach to really address it, and that relates to your previous question to Tom. Does the Danforth Center collaborate with other institutions? I think it's really necessary to do so to tackle this topic, whether regionally or globally. And so it provides an ideal training for interdisciplinary graduate student training that hopefully is very exciting to young scientists.
Yeah, and I want to expand on this interdisciplinary training. So, within my group and a few other groups here at the Institute, we're looking for very different types of students. So students who have, say, an engineering education, students who know how to program, who have very good quantitative skills, who like numbers, because we're entering this big data era where we are looking at terabytes of data. So from the...
I think maybe you should tell the audience how much a terabyte is.
Ooh, a lot.
I recognize a lot. Yeah.
So it's a lot. You can't store it on your hard drive, and you rapidly fill up. Storage becomes a big issue when we're trying to process these data sets. And so you actually need to develop new algorithms to deal with this sort of data. So it's a very, if you would originally think of a plant scientist as a botanist, someone who might like to look at plants and look at characters of plants, we still need that, but we also need the folks who are good at crunching numbers, and the engineers, computer scientists. And I think there's such a pressing need to improve crop productivity now that should be a good motivator for students. There's a global demand for crop productivity, and there's industries. There are, at Monsanto now, they're hiring several hundred people over the next few years. They're developing a whole new wing of their site out in Chesterfield, and that's driven by this need to increase crop productivity. So there's a real local demand in industry,
Sure.
and there's a real, I think, challenge academically in trying to marry these various disciplines, and it creates a very exciting environment.
Mm-hmm. And the group leader himself or herself has to be fairly interdisciplinary to keep these several different disciplines collaborating and working cooperatively.
Yeah, I like to drink coffee and BS a lot, and so I need my students to carry the load. So,
Okay. This might be for either one of you. What role, if any, do you see for GMO in overcoming the increasing strain on our global water resources? Are we talking about genetic modification of root systems, of leaves, of
certainly GMOs are going to play a role, and it's one of the tools that we all have in our arsenal to improve crop productivity. But the pace that we want this to happen we're going to need to use transgenics. And that is not to say that those technologies work in isolation. We're also going to employ traditional breeding technologies. We're going to develop new technologies to put genes in the appropriate combinations. But certainly transgenics offer us an opportunity that to greatly accelerate progress in this area.
Here's one that I might be able to answer, but I'll let you all have first crack at it. Now that we've had so much rain, should we care about drought?
So, so there's an article I've been working with some colleagues on to try and put last year's drought into perspective. And there's actually a colleague of mine at the University of Missouri that's used tree ring dating to look back at the severity of drought over the last 1,000 years in the US, in the central region of the US. And we've had much drier times than this in the past. Actually, this last century, with the exception of the Dust Bowl years in the 1930s, which are obviously quite devastating, but as a whole, that century was not very drought prone. The 18th century was much more severe, with decade-long periods of relatively dry weather. So the fact that we had one dry year last year and we now seem to be out of it is not really telling us what's going to happen in the future down the road. So drought is a recurring theme. We have the uncertainty of climate change. Models predict various different things. I'm not sure if we want to get into that today. So droughts are predicted to get worse in some areas in the US and globally, and other areas would receive more rainfall. But historically, significant and sometimes very extended periods of drought are the normal situation, not the exception. So it's really something that we do have to prepare for.
And again, it's just this productivity issue. So if we're demanding year after year higher and higher yield gains, inevitably there's going to be a drought somewhere across the globe. And all of our major cereal crops are global commodities. So what happens in Australia or in Russia or in the Midwest affects global markets. And so you can be sure that there's a drought happening right now, and we're feeling the effects of it right here, even though it's raining outside.
Well, this gets to a topic we haven't talked about at all, but that is food reserve or food stock. And if you are going sort of from the field to the plate, then if there's a bad year, people go hungry. If you have a substantial reserve, a larder, then a bad year, you draw down your reserves.
Like we did last year.
Yeah. Have they been adequately built up? Do we have that kind of protection against the consequences of drought? Or are we one drought away from real hunger?
Yeah, no, I would say we're one drought away from real hunger. I heard that the maize reserves were drawn down to a 2-month supply. So essentially we stopped harvesting, and this was about a year ago. We stopped harvesting. We would have 2 months and we'd run out of corn. And so that's record low in terms of reserve. And so, there's responses. We've got the north and the south. So the north of the equator, we're growing things at a different time than we are in Argentina. And so there are, relatively quick responses to the bad summer we had in the Midwest. But again, everything's very tight and prices are very high. So it doesn't take much to tip it.
Here's one that's just right for you, Bob. As the root system is so important, how does one train plants, that's my word, it maybe shouldn't have ever come up, how does one train plants to grow deeper root systems? Would this deeper root system help during drought seasons? And if you can't train the plant, how does it have sense enough to know?
Well, I already alluded to this earlier on in the reference to the wheat work in Australia. So deeper rooting is obviously very important under sun drought circumstances, obviously when there is water available at depth. An aspect of this that we haven't touched on yet is, I guess following on your example of training plants, we don't necessarily want to develop or engineer plants that just have a really big root system under all circumstances, because then you're taking photosynthesis away from developing leaves and developing economic yield. So there's a terminology we use is called plasticity of development. So a plastic development, meaning you can change from this situation to that situation. What we really want is plants that can adapt to the situation. So when a drought starts developing, the plant can switch priority and start putting more emphasis on developing roots at depth, but not doing so if it's a well-watered year, so the drought is not a problem. Because the other thing that you've got to realize that roots do, they don't just take up water, they take up nutrients. And in most agricultural situations, the nutrients are in the upper part of the profile. So you certainly don't want just all your roots at depth. So what we really want is plants that can respond to their environment in as I said, in this so-called plastic way. And so this comes back to the comment Tom made at the beginning of the discussion, that plants have these intricate and complex sensing systems, very complex, but also certainly in the case of roots, very poorly understood because they haven't been studied very much. And if we could understand that a lot more, we might be able to manipulate that and improve upon the ability of root systems to respond to their environmental condition.
And bringing it back to this bioenergy point you brought up earlier. So, right now in the U.S., we're getting all of our ethanol from corn-based grain, and that's an annual crop. So we plant it every year and we harvest it. So the investment that plant wants to make in its root system is pretty limited. It has to get through that growing season. As we move to this second generation of bioenergy grasses, these are perennials. So these are plants that are growing, coming back year after year after year. So at the end of the season, what those plants are going to do is move a lot of their nitrogen from the leaves down into the root systems and develop much more extensive root systems. And then the next year, remobilize some of that nitrogen back up into the leaves. So they're very efficient. So what you would harvest from those plants is essentially carbon skeletons. And that's what you would use for biofuel production.
Switchgrass, for example.
So switchgrass is a good example. Miscanthus is something that's grown around here. And so we have this potential for developing a crop that has better water use efficiency. It can invest the time in this root system, and it also uses nitrogen more effectively. And it's essentially producing what exactly we want to burn or produce ethanol from above ground.
And by using the switchgrass, you save the corn for food use rather than fuel use.
Right. So right now we use about equal amounts of corn for ethanol production and animal feed. Mm-hmm. Actually, very little goes to feeding people directly.
But we eat the pigs.
But we do eat the pigs. We do eat the cows.
Here's one probably related to what we've talked about. Ethanol versus algae oils. Which uses the most water?
I'd have to say algae.
Algae uses the most water?
Yeah, so this has been one of the biggest challenges with using algae as a source of biofuels. And so one solution to this is to start to identify and characterize and really engineer algae to deal with more brackish water. So not nice fresh water, which is, as we know, very limiting. So if you can get algae to produce lots of oil with not the best sources of water, then...
Are you talking about gray water or are you talking about salty water?
Salty water. But gray water is also a solution, but it's going to be on a smaller scale. And so that's really, I think, what's one of the big challenges with algal based productions of oils, but it's certainly something that many groups are looking at now.
For Doctors Brutnell and Sharp, what's the role of U.S. agriculture in the global water crises? I'm not sure I understand the question. Is agriculture contributing to the water crisis? Is agriculture, the way we practice it, using up more water than we have to use up?
So certainly, that varies quite a bit with regions. So, across the Midwest, most of our corn is rain-fed. Mm-hmm. You go out in the Western Plains, and it's irrigated lands.
Well, the article you mentioned in the New York Times was talking about, so it's equivalent to, or analogous to the example in northwest China I was talking about, but the aquifer in the middle part of the U.S. that goes all the way from South Dakota down to Texas is called the Ogallala Aquifer. It's several hundred feet deep underground, and the water that's in that is what is used to sustain irrigation for crop production. So, if you fly on a plane from here out to Denver, you see all the irrigated circles, pivot irrigation circles. So this has been tremendous in terms of increasing productivity in those areas, but it's using this water from the underground aquifer, and that water actually is thought to have come from at least the last ice age. It's not replenished very rapidly at all, very, very slowly. And so it's actually being used up by irrigation, and it's already having effects in northern Texas where they can't use, there are areas that simply can't use irrigated agriculture anymore because that part of the aquifer has dried up. So yeah, there's a overconsumption of water in this country, which then would obviously affect globally in terms of effects on food security and global economics as well.
We may have answered this one along the way, but it's sufficiently important. I want to read this one exactly. As plants adjust to low water availability, are they able to maintain edible fruit production and other food products in adequate amounts?
So sometimes limited water helps in the case of grapes.
Grapes.
Right?
You don't dilute the wine as much.
So that's right. It's a little sweeter. But for most crops, less water means less yield. And if you would, especially our row crops, it's going to be, it's perhaps the greatest limitation to crop productivity now.
Is it possible to think about redesigning the plant so that with less water it would be as productive?
Certainly. So this is
what you're saying now is that as crops are now, they have less water, they're less productive.
Right, right. So what we want to do is start to understand this process and then confer plants that are, say, less efficient at utilizing water with more efficient tools. So one of the projects that we're involved in is a project funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and that's to engineer the C4 trait that I mentioned before with that corn and sorghum utilize into rice. And if we can install this new photosynthetic system into rice, we can increase the productivity of rice by as much as 50%. And this, that would be a huge gain in the productivity of those plants. They would use less water, they would use less nitrogen, and produce as much, if not more, than the current rice varieties with similar amounts of water.
You're nodding, Bob. You want to add?
Oh, just in agreement with what he's saying. I mean, it would be an amazing accomplishment if that, and there's a huge effort to try and accomplish this. I'd like actually Tom's comment on what time frame do you see to get that accomplished?
Yeah, not tomorrow. So, and again, this goes back to the funding, right? So we're not only doing an engineering project, we're doing a discovery-based project. So we need to understand how this process works in the C4 crops and then try to engineer it. And so, there's suites of genes, dozens and dozens of genes that are associated with this particular trait. We don't know what all of those genes are. We don't know how to regulate those genes. And then we need to change anatomy and biochemistry. But it's a challenge. It's a grand challenge, and in that sense, it's very exciting.
Discovery now and engineering comes later.
A little bit of both. So we try to engineer as we go, but we fail more times than we succeed. But we learn along that path.
Sure.
Can I just follow up on this comment in terms of time frame? That's why I really asked that question. So you didn't really answer the question, but we're talking about quite a substantial chunk of time here.
10 to 15 years.
10 to 15 years for something that, with intensive effort, might have huge results. Returning to my own topic on roots, they're so understudied, and the obvious simplistic reason is because they're underground and difficult to study, and as you've seen, very complex.
Out of sight, out of mind.
So again?
Out of sight,
out of sight, out of mind. And so they've been relatively ignored. I think activity is picking up now because they're obviously so important. But just to sort of illustrate the point, some of the key questions related to how roots adapt to drought that were key questions when I was a graduate student are still key questions now.
That was at least 10 years ago.
At least 10 years ago. And so that rate of progress, at this stage of my career, I can sort of look at that and find that sort of frustrating because these are really important questions and there's so little activity and also related to the investment in research that Tom was discussing. But these are critical questions, whether applying to the roots or C4 photosynthesis as he described. If we don't pick up speed and really invest much more on this, I mean, we're talking about another 20, 30 years before. And we don't have the time to really wait that long to make some of these advances. So we really need increased attention, increased funding, increased education, increase, as you said, more students excited about getting into this area because there's such important advances to be made.
And and from a training perspective, in science, like all fields, there's waves of interest and there's fashion. Right now, the stuff we're doing is very fashionable, so it's great. It's great for us. Studying C4 photosynthesis, but it wasn't always that way. And we struggled a lot when I was just starting out just to get a grant to study C4 photosynthesis. And so, the risk is you skip a generation of biochemists or physiologists or anatomists, and you're done. Right? It's much harder to get the students trained because you've lost that expertise. And the work that Bob does, I mean, it's crucial, and there are very few people that have his skill set in physiology to really build on the history of research in this area. So, having that consistent funding and
you don't want
funding
consistent funding, you want growing funding.
and growing, yeah. But we're going the opposite direction now, right? We're shrinking our funding base. So. The NSF is probably going to fund 10% less grants this year than they did last year.
In this country, food security is still not a salient issue, I think. Most people go into the grocery store, and the furthest thing to their mind is food insecurity. And if there is insecurity, it's largely economic-based, not absence of food-based. I'm afraid we've come to the end of our questions. In fact, by that 1 o'clock, it's 4 minutes over. But can I call on Molly Klein again? She said hello. Now it's her time to say goodbye. And thank you again. Thank you.
In behalf of Dr. Carrington, who is losing his voice, I would like to again thank our experts, Dr. Sharp, Dr. Brutnell, and Professor Davis for moderating, and thanks to the students who brought your displays too, because that was excellent. And we wish you a lot of continued success in your research, and we know these conversations are going to go on for 10 years, 10 years, 10 years. Our next one will be August 29th, so put that on your calendar. And Dr. Carrington is going to have his voice back then because he's the featured panelist that night. You're going to hear about a new technology platform in plant science. It'll be very exciting information. Again, you heard the great challenges that we have, the need for continued plant research and funding. We thank all of the friends, and we have room for growing friends. So thank you again. And have a lovely holiday weekend, and be safe going home. Thank you.